Welcome to Earth Gym. The gymnasium was cavernous, its polished floors reflecting the dull light from overhead. A dozen different alien species sat in rows of benches, their eyes wide and cautious as they whispered among themselves. Each one was a visual spectacle: a Zorlak with muscular, insect-like limbs, a Creel with a bioluminescent shell that flickered nervously, and even a sleek Balerian who seemed to be made of living metal. All these species, powerful in their own rights, were about to experience something far outside their comfort zones. The door slid open with a hiss. The students stiffened. In walked Sam Miller. He was a human, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding an undeniable aura of confidence. His Earth-issued gym uniform fit snugly, accentuating his wiry muscles and solid frame. To the alien students, he was an oddity. An enigma. A Deathworlder. Sam didn't seem to notice the apprehension in the room. He cracked his neck and smiled, his teeth white against the backdrop of alien faces. "All right, kids," Sam began, his voice smooth yet firm. "Time to show you how we do it back home." There was a moment of stunned silence. Sam could feel the tension hanging in the air like thick smoke. Some of the students' eyes widened in disbelief, others exchanged uneasy glances. They had been prepared for theoretical lessons on biology, on Earth's ecosystems, maybe even a few lessons on human history. But gym? A Deathworlder teaching them gym? "Are you sure you want to do this?" Tlora's voice broke the silence, sharp and cutting. A Valnari, her lithe frame barely making her stand out among the others in the room. Her bright violet eyes fixed on Sam, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion in her gaze. Sam met her eyes, a grin tugging at his lips. He wasn't about to back down now. "Are you sure you can keep up?" Sam teased. Tlora blinked, and for a moment, her posture stiffened. A slight quiver passed through her, but it was gone in a second. She wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone who looked like they could tear through her people's defenses without breaking a sweat. Her pride, proudly Valnari, bristled. The alien students shifted uncomfortably, the room humming with a quiet energy, a mix of intrigue and anxiety. "Let's start simple," Sam said, clasping his hands together. "We'll start with push-ups. Human style." A few of the students looked at each other in confusion. Push-ups? They knew of the concept, but they had never actually done them. The Valnari, for example, didn't need such exercises. Their physiology was more suited to high mental tasks than physical ones. Other species in the room were no better. Physical exertion was not exactly a priority for them. And here was Sam, a human, with muscles that could probably tear through the fabric of space itself. The students exchanged nervous glances. Sam didn't seem fazed. "I'm going first," Sam said, dropping to the floor with ease. His body went straight into the first set of push-ups, moving with a fluidity and precision that left the onlookers silent. His arms and chest were a study in strength, every movement controlled. "See? Easy," Sam called out, his voice lightly teasing. "Come on. All of you, give it a try." One by one, the students started hesitantly getting down on the floor, trying to follow Sam's example. The first alien, a bulky Creel with 4 arms, managed a few, but his movements were stiff and uncoordinated. The Zorlak didn't even get halfway through before he collapsed, his mandibles clicking in frustration. The Balerian, a living metal construct, found it physically impossible to do anything resembling a push-up, instead sending a dull hum through its body as it attempted to mimic Sam's technique. Tlora, however, watched silently from the back of the room, her face unreadable. She wasn't about to make herself vulnerable, especially not in front of these humans. Sam watched the struggle with mild amusement, his confidence unwavering. He wasn't looking to break anyone. Not yet, anyway. His job here wasn't just to teach them gym, it was to show them that humans, the most dangerous species in the galaxy, were a force to be reckoned with, not just physically, but in spirit. "You know, where I come from, doing one push-up is nothing," Sam said. "We start kids doing them when they can crawl. This is nothing." Tlora scoffed, though the sound was almost imperceptible. Primitive, she muttered under her breath. Sam paused, his eyes flicking toward her. Her gaze was sharp, her posture stiff, but he could feel the hesitation buried beneath her outward calm. "What was that?" Sam asked, though his tone was friendly. He didn't want to antagonize her, but something about the way she dismissed his efforts piqued his interest. "Nothing," she said, her violet eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Just amused." Sam smiled. He could sense the doubt she had, the wall she was building up against him. It wasn't uncommon. In his experience, some aliens found it hard to accept that humanity could be so physically dominant, especially when they were more accustomed to intellectual superiority. "Well, Tlora," Sam said, standing up and dusting off his hands. "You're up next. Let's see if I'm just being primitive, or if maybe there's something more to it." Tlora hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking between Sam and the other students. But the pressure of the room was too much. Slowly, she moved toward the center of the gym, taking a deep breath before she crouched down to begin. She struggled immediately. Her delicate arms quivered under the strain of supporting her weight, and she couldn't complete a full push-up without collapsing onto the floor. A few snickers echoed through the gym as her face flushed, but she quickly regained composure. "I don't need this," she muttered to herself, standing up with a huff. "It's beneath me." Sam could see the pride burning in her eyes, but he didn't push her further. Instead, he simply nodded. "Don't worry, Tlora. It's okay to struggle," he said. "But everyone starts somewhere." Tlora didn't respond, but the tension between them lingered, a quiet storm building. The rest of the class moved on to other exercises, but Sam couldn't help but watch her. There was something about Tlora, a fierce intelligence masked by her apparent fragility, that intrigued him. He wasn't here to break them down, but to push them to recognize the strength that lay outside the comfort zones they had built for themselves. And in Tlora's case, Sam felt a challenge more dangerous than anything he'd ever faced. The class continued, but Sam knew this was just the beginning. Tensions rise. The day after the push-up debacle, Sam Miller walked into the gym, his steps purposeful and confident. The room was quieter than the day before, the students already seated in their assigned spots. They watched him carefully as he set up a series of obstacles, a variety of human-designed equipment meant to test speed, agility, and endurance. The challenge ahead was simple, an obstacle course designed to push each student's physical limits. Sam wasn't here to make anyone look bad. His goal was to show them that strength wasn't something you inherited, it was something you built. That, and the fact that Earth's gym programs were world-renowned for a reason. He glanced around, sizing up the students. Their faces reflected a mixture of fear, curiosity, and confusion. They were looking for any excuse not to participate, any reason to avoid the discomfort that came with testing their physical limits. He couldn't blame them, their homeworlds hadn't exactly taught them to thrive under such brutal conditions. Tlora was seated toward the back, her arms crossed, eyes hard as ever. She hadn't said a word since yesterday. Sam was certain that her intellect was already plotting some form of resistance to what he had planned. What was troubling was that she seemed to view his strength not just as physical power, but as a threat to everything her species held dear. "All right, listen up." Sam clapped his hands to gather their attention, his voice cutting through the thick air. "Today, we're going to test endurance and agility. This is the obstacle course. You'll climb, crawl, jump, and push yourselves. If you can't finish, no big deal, just try to keep moving." He moved to the starting line and turned to face them all. Tlora was still watching, her face unreadable. "Who's first?" Sam asked, scanning the students. The silence stretched, longer than it should have. No one volunteered. Tlora, not one to back down from a challenge, slowly stood up. Her violet eyes locked with Sam's. "I'll go," she said, her voice clipped and firm. There was a steely resolve behind her words, but also a flicker of something else, something Sam recognized. Fear. She strode to the starting line, her movements deliberate and controlled. Sam couldn't help but notice the way her every step was calculated, how her posture was perfect, how she hid the slight trembling of her hands. The Valmari were a species of the mind, not of brute strength. They relied on strategy, intellect, and efficiency. This physical challenge was something far outside her wheelhouse. Sam, however, wasn't looking to embarrass her. He simply wanted to push her to see that her strength wasn't defined by her ability to outsmart others, but by how far she could push herself. "Ready when you are," Sam said, giving her an encouraging nod. Tlora took a deep breath and shot forward. Her body moved with a swiftness that surprised Sam, her long limbs flowing like a dancer's as she leaped over the first hurdle. She was fast, but her strength didn't match her speed. As she came to the first climbing wall, her fingers struggled to grip the textured surface. She made it halfway before slipping, her feet scrambling for purchase as her face contorted in frustration. Sam, watching her from the sidelines, resisted the urge to step in and help. This was about more than just finishing. It was about learning how to overcome the fear of failure. Tlora grunted and tried again, her movements more desperate now. She reached the top and vaulted over the edge, only to stumble forward awkwardly, barely catching herself before hitting the ground. Sweat dotted her brow as she continued on, pushing through despite the clear signs of physical strain. Sam couldn't help but admire her determination. She wasn't the fastest, nor the most physically adept, but she wasn't quitting either. The obstacle course wasn't about perfection, it was about grit. Tlora completed the first lap, panting but standing tall. She wiped her hands on her uniform, then fixed Sam with a defiant look. "Satisfied?" "Not yet," Sam replied, his voice steady. "You made it through the first round. But the real challenge starts now." He waved his hand toward the next section, a series of weighted ropes that the students would need to drag across the floor while sprinting to the finish line. Tlora's eyes flickered toward the ropes, then back to Sam. She wasn't going to show him weakness, not now. But she was struggling. Sam could see it in the tightness of her posture, the way her body seemed to rebel with every step. She grabbed one of the ropes, and Sam could see her muscles straining under the weight. She pulled, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but the rope barely budged. "I told you," Sam called out, his voice sharp but encouraging. "The key is in your legs, not your arms. You need to use your core to stabilize." Tlora shot him a look but adjusted her stance, trying to use her legs as Sam had suggested. It worked. The rope started to slide, but she was still moving at a snail's pace compared to the rest of the students. The Balerion, who had been watching from the sidelines, moved past her effortlessly, its metallic limbs working in tandem with the ropes. It didn't struggle or falter. Tlora's face flushed as she watched the machine-like alien breeze past her. A surge of irritation flared inside her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She should be better at this. "Come on, Tlora," Sam called out again. "You can do it." But Tlora's eyes, once sharp and proud, now looked weary. She gave one last, frustrated yank, and the rope slipped from her grip. She collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving as she glared at the distant finish line. "I'm done," she snapped. "This is beneath me." Sam stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're not done. You're just getting started." She didn't respond, but Sam could see the cracks beginning to form in her carefully constructed walls. Her pride was bruised. He knew that look. He'd seen it on Earth before, on athletes who refused to accept defeat, but more importantly, on those who didn't yet know what it meant to lose. "I won't quit," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "You don't have to," Sam said, offering her a hand. "But you need to get comfortable with discomfort. It's the only way to grow." Tlora hesitated, her pride warping her ability to accept help. But Sam's steady, unyielding gaze seemed to cut through the fog of her emotions. Slowly, she took his hand. "I'll finish this," she said, her voice tight. And though it took her longer than the others, she did finish it, no faster, no stronger, but with a quiet resilience that spoke more than words ever could. The other students watched, their skepticism starting to melt away. Sam didn't just teach them strength. He taught them persistence. And Tlora? She learned that the most formidable weapon was not intellect, but the willingness to continue even when everything inside you told you to stop. As Sam observed her, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The challenge wasn't about breaking them. It was about showing them how strong they could really be. Breaking point. The third day of gym class arrived with an almost tangible weight in the air. The students trickled in slowly, their eyes trained on the human standing at the front of the gym. Sam Miller had already made his presence known, his challenge had cut deeper than any physical exertion. Now, his students were learning what it meant to face themselves. Tlora entered last, her usual confidence tempered by an unspoken weariness. She had been pushing herself since the obstacle course the day before, but she hadn't quite reconciled the bruising that came with admitting her physical limitations. Her face was hard, a mask she wore to shield herself from whatever she felt she couldn't control. Her bruised pride was buried beneath layers of indifference. Sam saw her approach, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed the subtle tension in her movements. He wasn't going to let it slide. Not today. "All right, people," Sam called, his voice carrying across the gym. "Today, we're focusing on strength. We'll work on resistance training. Pull-ups, squats, lunges, and some more rope work. I'm going to test how you handle real strength, not the kind that shows up on a chart." The room fell silent. The words real strength hung in the air, heavy with unspoken challenge. Sam wasn't trying to scare them, but if they weren't feeling some level of discomfort, then they weren't learning. Tlora stayed near the back of the gym, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had already decided she wouldn't let Sam see her fail again. Her pride wouldn't let her. But as Sam began to explain the exercises in more detail, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet sense of foreboding. Sam motioned for everyone to pair up, and Tlora was assigned to work with a creature named Kalyth, a 6-foot, stocky Gandhar who had broad, powerful arms and a reputation for brute strength. Tlora didn't particularly care for the Gandhar. They were arrogant, often too quick to show off their strength, their muscle more intimidating than intelligent. Still, Kalyth was the closest to Sam in terms of raw power, and Tlora wasn't about to back down. "Let's get started," Sam called. Tlora approached the barbell station and locked eyes with Kalyth, who gave her a smirk as he flexed his biceps. His tone was mocking, though he kept it polite. "You want to go first, Valmari?" "I don't mind waiting." Tlora didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She stepped up to the barbell, eyeing the weight, which was almost twice her body mass. Her lips tightened. "This is beneath you, Tlora," she thought. "You're not a soldier. You're a strategist." But there was no avoiding the challenge. She gripped the bar, adjusted her stance, and attempted to lift. Her arms trembled immediately under the weight. Her knees wobbled. She knew what would come next, but she fought against it. She would not collapse under the pressure. Sam's voice came from the side. "Don't just lift it with your arms, Tlora. Use your core." The words sounded simple, but in that moment, they felt like a hammer strike to her pride. "Core," she thought. "I'm supposed to use my core to lift this." She tried again, a deep breath filling her lungs as she shifted her posture. This time, her legs provided the support, and with a grunt, she managed to lift the bar just off the ground before her arms gave out. She caught herself before she collapsed to the floor. Her face flushed with embarrassment, but there was no turning back now. Kalyth raised an eyebrow, though he said nothing. Again, Sam ordered, his voice commanding, but not unkind. Tlora exhaled, frustration mounting as she gripped the bar once more. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to concentrate. "You've been through worse," she reminded herself. She attempted to lift again, and this time, with a controlled effort, she pushed through the resistance. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she held on. Slowly, the barbell rose higher, inch by inch. Her legs burned, but her core held steady. It wasn't a perfect lift, but it was enough. She set the weight back down with a heavy breath, sweat dripping from her brow. Klyth smirked again. Not bad, Velnari. But not good enough either. Sam stepped forward. Klyth, you'll spot her. Try to make the next set better, Tlora. You've got more in you. Tlora didn't respond, but there was a new fire in her eyes. She gripped the bar again, her hands firm, her stance more stable. She forced herself to focus. Sam had said she could do this. And he didn't lie. Not about this. This time, the weight didn't seem so heavy. She lifted it higher, faster, and as she reached the apex, her muscles screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. She held the bar above her head for several seconds, her face contorting with the strain. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. When she finally lowered the bar, she exhaled in relief, her body shaking with the effort. Sam was watching, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Well done, he said, his voice low but approving. That's progress. Tlora couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride, though she quickly buried it under layers of cool detachment. She wasn't about to let Sam see how much the compliment meant. It's nothing, she muttered, stepping away from the station. Don't sell yourself short, Sam replied, his tone steady. Nothing is nothing when you fight for it. Tlora turned away from him, walking toward the next station. Her eyes flickered to Klyth, who had been watching her with a hint of begrudging respect. But Tlora didn't care about his approval. What she was starting to realize was that she had nothing to prove to anyone else, only to herself. The next few minutes blurred into a series of lifting exercises, resistance training, and grueling sprints. Despite the discomfort, despite the burning in her limbs, Tlora kept moving. Her muscles began to feel like they were made of fire, but there was a satisfaction in it, a raw power building within her. By the end of the session, Sam called for a break. The students collapsed on the mats, breathing heavily, nursing aching muscles. The Balerian, its body glowing faintly with exertion, seemed unaffected, but the others weren't so lucky. Tlora, lying on her back, looked up at the ceiling. Her body was sore, her pride still a little bruised, but there was something else, a quiet, steady pulse of realization. She had done it. She hadn't been the fastest, the strongest, or the most graceful, but she had done it. Good work today, Sam said, walking past her. But remember, we're just getting started. The human body is capable of more than you think. And if you want to learn how to break your limits, you have to keep pushing. Tlora sat up slowly, her muscles protesting with every movement. She didn't speak, but she watched Sam as he moved to check on the others. Keep pushing, he had said. She wasn't sure yet if she could keep up, but the thought of trying, of surpassing herself, left her feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Hope,